In this video, we're going to talk about video editing software, particularly about choosing the video editing software that is right for you. That's right for your computer, your operating system, or just the software that you prefer. Video editing software is some of the most technically demanding and processor-intensive software out there. It's very difficult to build a good video editing platform from both a user interface perspective and from a technical perspective. That's why most video editing software on the market is very, very bad. And there are lots to choose from, but most of the choices are not very good. It can be confusing to ascertain which one is right for you. So in this video, I'm going to try to clear some of that up. I have a pretty extensive background in video editing software. And I hope at the end of this video, if you haven't already decided on which video editing app to choose, then I hope this video will help. So basically, for our discussion here, we can divide video editors into three types. We have free video editors, entry-level video editors, and professional video editors. So the free video editors are made or just comprised of free apps, sometimes called freeware or open source or proprietary apps, software that just came with your computer. The entry-level video editors, now these are the video editing apps that tend to be cheaper and are aimed at the hobbyist or the beginner user or someone who just wants to do small-scale video production. And then we have professional video editors, which are aimed at professionals, people who work in the industry. Now, the distinction between these three categories is actually pretty vague. It is possible these days to create a Hollywood caliber movie even on a cheap entry-level video editor, even with a cheap computer, because computers are pretty good these days. So the placement of the video editors in these three categories is quite subjective. But in any case, I'm going to give you my opinion about the apps and how they fall into the categories here and which ones you'll probably want to use and to avoid. So here's a list of some free video editors. We have Windows Movie Maker, iMovie, OpenShot, and Videoland Movie Creator. So let's talk about each of these very briefly. The first one is Windows Movie Maker. Now this is what the majority of beginners start out on. It's really big because it comes bundled for free with Microsoft Windows and was initially released way back in September of 2000. So it's been around for a long time. Now I thought the initial version of this app was actually pretty good. In several of the previous versions, it was a pretty usable app, but unfortunately in recent years it's really gone downhill. Personally, I hate the new interface they've created for the newer versions of this app, and if you're at all serious about video editing, I now recommend that you stay away from Windows Movie Maker altogether. I don't recommend this one anymore. And that's really a shame because it actually used to be pretty good. So let's look at what's next on our list. iMovie. iMovie comes free with your Mac. Everyone who has a Mac eventually makes at least something with iMovie. So if you're on a Mac, this is probably where you'll get your start in video editing, which is fine. iMovie is a decent video editor. But eventually, if you get at all serious with making videos, with making web videos, then most people on Macs will eventually upgrade to Final Cut Pro. Final Cut Pro is the higher end video editor that's really big on the Mac, and we'll talk about Final Cut Pro a little more later. Okay, now we're getting down to the open source apps. The third one on our list is called OpenShot Video Editor. So there are several open source initiatives out there. If you don't know what the open source movement is, it's just a collection of people who actually get together and make software for free. So these are very nice people making this stuff for free, but unfortunately, OpenShot, while free, is actually also quite young and not a very mature piece of software. You'll probably find it quite difficult to use, and it will probably crash a lot on your computer. But that said, OpenShot is very promising, and it might be a great app someday. It probably will be a great app someday. But right now I can't recommend it because it's just too tricky to use and too unstable. And the fourth option on our list, Videoland Movie Creator. This is another open source video editor. It's another promising open source app, and it's free, but again, it has the same problem. It's just not very mature. It just doesn't work very well yet. You can try it out and download it for yourself and give it a try, but it will probably crash on your computer, and you'll probably find that it's just not very easy to use. So here again, we can't recommend this one yet either. Okay, so now let's talk about the entry-level video editors. These would be the video editors that people who watch this class would probably want to get. People who really don't want to become professional Hollywood movie editors, but you want to make videos for your website or for YouTube or for marketing presentations, etc., etc. So it's probably from this middle column where you'll start out. Let's look at the first one here, Camtasia Studio. So this is Camtasia Studio. This is my favorite video editor. This is the editor that I use 95% of the time. If you haven't invested in any sort of video editor yet, then I would highly recommend Camtasia for several reasons. First reason is, in my opinion, Camtasia is by far the easiest video editor to use. Second, it comes with its own screen recorder app. Camtasia has the best screen recorder app on the market, and it comes bundled with their video editor. So you get the best screen recorder bundled with, I think, the easiest to use video editor. They're designed to work together, and they do. They work together quite well. So for what we do, for the creation of marketing presentations or online video, Camtasia is really, really, really great for our particular market. Now, the downside is Camtasia is expensive. It costs $299. So that's definitely a significant investment. But for what we do as website owners, this is definitely the best app. So you'll probably want to seriously consider at least trying Camtasia at some point. And then next up we have Sony Movie Studio. So Sony Movie Studio is really just a scaled down version of Sony's other professional video editor called Sony Vegas Pro. So the upside is it only costs $50, which is a great price. Sony Movie Studio is, in my opinion, the best video editor in the $50 price range. $50 is a pretty good price for all the software you get here. Now the downside is it's not as intuitive, it's not as easy to use as Camtasia. There is a bit of a learning curve. It's a big app, but this is definitely the best second choice. And again, it's only $50. Next we have Adobe Premiere Elements. So here again, Adobe Premiere Elements is a scaled down version of Adobe's professional video editor called Adobe Premiere. Adobe Premiere is of course the industry standard video editor, at least for the PC market. And here again, just like Sony Movie Studio, Adobe Premiere Elements only cost about $50. Now I used to recommend people start off with this app, with Adobe Premiere Elements. But unfortunately, I don't really recommend it anymore because in recent years, they really tweaked their interface and in my opinion, made it much worse. They made it much more difficult to use. And that's very unfortunate because like Microsoft Movie Maker, it used to be a nice program. But now I find their new asset management system to be very cumbersome. So I'm not really a fan of Adobe Premiere Elements anymore. And next up at the bottom of our list, we have Lightworks. So Lightworks costs $24, but it's $24 every month. It's a recurring fee, or you could buy it for $450 outright. So it's not too cheap. Lightworks is unique because they try to sell you some very elaborate and expensive hardware with their editor. The hardware looks pretty cool at least, and I used to use a similar jog wheel back in the day. But really, for most of the viewers of this class, it's pretty superfluous. I've experimented with several of these in the past, and I don't find them to be that useful anymore for most of what we do. And most importantly, I found Lightworks to be a very cumbersome and unintuitive interface. Lightworks is an old software application. It goes all the way back to the initial release date of 1989, and this is quite evident when you use it. It has a very dated workflow. So I don't really recommend Lightworks either. Now let's talk about the big guys in video editing, the big apps. First, on the top right here, we have Adobe Premiere. Adobe Premiere is a hugely successful app, like most Adobe products. It has a huge user base and spans a couple decades. I was using Adobe Premiere way back in the mid-90s. And it's used on everything from major Hollywood movies to television shows, etc. It's pretty much the industry standard video editor in the PC market. But it is a very big and very complicated and very expensive program. And for what we do as website owners, as creators of internet video, etc., it's usually more than we need. It's bigger than we need. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for the majority of people who watch this class unless you're really serious about continuing your training in video editing. Then you might want to try it because, again, Adobe Premiere is very widely used in the industry. It's the industry standard. But if you're just starting out, you're better off sticking with Camtasia or Sony Movie Studio because they're cheaper and easier to use. Now, second on our list, we have Final Cut Pro. So if you're on a Mac, you'll almost certainly be using either iMovie or this editor, Final Cut Pro. Final Cut Pro is a beautifully designed app. It has definitely the prettiest user interface of any of the video editors out there, and it's the industry standard video editor for all things Apple. It has a huge following among creative professionals too. Now, the downside is it does cost about $300. So if you're on a Mac, then start with iMovie, because iMovie is free, but consider upgrading to Final Cut Pro if you get deeper into video creation and video editing. So next we have Sony Vegas Pro. Now, if you're watching this class, then you typically not want to bother with Sony Vegas Pro, at least not until you are absolutely sure you couldn't get all you wanted out of Sony Movie Studio. So recall that Sony Movie Studio is just a stripped down version of Sony Vegas Pro. Just to review briefly, Sony Movie Studio is a stripped down version of Sony Vegas Pro, and Adobe Premiere Elements is just a stripped down version of Adobe Premiere. Actually a severely scaled down version, but it's similar. But the point is, Sony Vegas Pro is a great app, but you'll definitely want to use the cheaper Sony Movie Studio before even attempting to try Sony Vegas Pro, because Sony Vegas Pro costs $600 and its scaled down version, Sony Movie Studio, only costs $50. So there's no reason to start with that level of investment in Sony Vegas Pro when you can just start out with the cheaper version, Sony Movie Studio. And at the bottom of our list, we have Avid Media Composer. This is an old school video editor that used to be favored by the Hollywood crowd, especially before Final Cut Pro gained so much traction. And this is another video editor that has some very cool looking hardware control surfaces associated with it. But again, for our purposes here, for the vast majority of us making web videos, there is just no need for this stuff. Additionally, Media Composer, like Lightworks, has an extremely complicated and dated user interface and has features that we will typically never use as website owners or online video creators. So I don't recommend this one either. Okay, so that was a breakdown of the major video editors on the market. There are others out there, but really most of them are not worth mentioning. Our list here pretty much sums up your current possible choices. So let's review. For the Mac people, let's look at the ones that run on a Mac. Here we have iMovie and Final Cut Pro. So if you're on a Mac, your choices are pretty easy. You want to start with iMovie because iMovie is free, and then consider migrating to Final Cut Pro eventually if you ever want to get serious about web video creation. So if you're on a Mac, your choices are pretty simple. So now let's look at the choices that only work on a PC. Okay, so if you're on a PC, then your choices are a little bit more complex, but really I don't recommend Windows Movie Maker as we discussed. OpenShot and Videolan are both open source apps that are just not mature enough yet, so you definitely are not going to have much luck with those probably. Camtasia Studio is my preferred software. It's the one I'm using right now. And Sony Movie Studio is a nice alternative for only $50. I no longer recommend Adobe Premiere Elements, and I no longer recommend Lightworks. Now, these other apps on the right, I no longer recommend Avid, but you might consider Adobe Premiere or Sony Vegas Pro if you want to continue with your video editing pursuits. But again, you'll either want to start with Camtasia or Sony Movie Studio. These are the two I would recommend for the PC market. So this concludes our little video editor buyer's guide. I hope the choices are a bit more clear now. Remember, the main point here is just to choose a video editor that you personally feel comfortable with and that works on your system. In looking at these app screenshots, I hope you have noticed how similar all of these video editors look. Learning how to use video editing software is quite similar to learning how to drive a car. Once you learn how to drive one car, then driving different types of vehicles is quite doable. Once you know how to use one video editing app, then most of the foundational functions will transfer over to any other video editing app quite easily.